From the entrepreneur side, rather than from the media side that I come from, how do you interpret the current state of tech in New York? How has it changed, and where do you think it's going? Because I know there are a lot of kind of grand not promises, but grand projections of this is going to be the next Silicon Valley. You know, should it be? I'd be very curious to hear what you all think.
From a hiring perspective, it is getting easier, especially engineers. As the tech community is growing, you're getting these sort of hubs of really good engineers here, like consulting agencies and other companies, bigger companies like Foursquare and Tumblr are here. And so that's bringing a lot of engineering power, and so that's, I think, been really good for hiring.
I think one of the things that entrepreneurs do extremely well is they go against where everyone else is going. And so one of the things that I think is a little bit dangerous about what's happening in New York right now is that all of a sudden it's incredibly appealing to start a company, especially a web company. And I think one of the most important things early on is that you are incredibly unique and incredibly differentiated. So there's incredible benefits to this sort of massive explosion of entrepreneurship in New York. But I think that people need to continuously say, well, how am I going to do it in a completely different way? Whether that's the business that they start, the industry they're in, or just trying to sort of buck the trend somewhere else.
I've definitely seen, and you did not used to see this in New York, I've definitely seen people found companies for the sake of being able to say they're founders, and their companies are really kind of lukewarm.
Yeah.
There's some people who probably shouldn't be entrepreneurs. I may be one of them.
I think you see that anytime it becomes, really, really trendy. It's also because with, if you sit around and read TechCrunch all the time, you think everybody's company gets $1 million from Andreessen, and then they're on this kind of hockey stick growth. And it's been interesting to me to watch, as things shake out, especially as some of the really frothy early funding dries up. You do see, who loves the spotlight, but also the 12 hours cranking on emails on a Saturday afternoon. And kind of what companies are sort of in it for the ups and downs and who's only in it for the ups.
Something that has been a little bit frustrating to me coming from Los Angeles and being raised there, where everyone's an actor, a producer, and a director. At some point, coming to New York, I started to feel like I started meeting entrepreneurs, VCs, and angels like directors, producers, and actors. So everyone's saying that they're a founder. But my experience of coming to New York and starting my company, I had pressed reset on my life. I moved across the country. I didn't know that many people. And I'm so grateful for the timing and the luck that I had that started to be, 2.5 years ago when the New York tech community really started to bubble up. And the community was very open. And I would go to events and people would be willing to sit down and, talk to me about my idea and willing to make introductions for me and inviting me to other events. And the community has actually been a tremendous asset and super helpful in the acceleration of, building my company, hiring the right people, and also helping us with our funding. So, the community is very real, and I think that as more companies are starting in New York and doing well, it is, of course, going to cause this ripple effect where everyone wants to, me too, start a company. But there is something very special and tremendous about the New York tech community that I have experienced personally. And it's, it is really special.
Do you think it's going to stay that way? Because I know that there's a lot of talk right now about the Series A crunch. Venture capital is harder to find right now than it was even a year ago. And there's definitely a sense of community here, I think in part because we look at Silicon Valley and how sometimes in the startup world that's there right now, there's just this really, really intense competition. And New York, with this perspective of all these other industries, I think we like to say that we have perspective to get beyond that and to help each other rather than just be at each other's throats. But as things are, because most of the entrepreneurs in New York right now are first time, I would say, and as things get a little bit more difficult, as they're trying to get a Series B and maybe they can't do it, is that community going to stay, or are people going to start to kind of get on edge, do you think?
I think the benefit that New York has over Silicon Valley is that the companies that are in New York have focused a lot more on revenue than the companies in Silicon Valley. And when you have a fundraising crunch, when you can't access fundraising, the other option you have is to become profitable, extend your runway, generate more revenue. And I think the companies in New York, if there does become like a real Series A crunch, then the companies in New York are better off because I think a lot of them have business models, they have revenue that they're trying to generate. You hear Catherine talking about how she's like, oh, I'm signing up this person to selling our information here, or signing up this deal, et cetera. Whereas in Silicon Valley, you often hear people never talk about, like, don't worry about business models, don't worry about revenue. So I think from a Series A crunch, it's good. But I think New York tech is almost like a foregone conclusion in my mind at this point. And the reason why I say that is I think it's all about having role models and examples that have been set. A lot of people think that New York tech became big because of the sort of finance crisis that happened, and a lot of people left finance to go start startups. But the truth is, when the finance crisis happened, it's not like the super great people in finance are the ones that were let go, right? So like 10% of people who lost their jobs, those aren't the people who ended up necessarily starting companies. What really happened is that in 2004, 2003, when you had companies like Meetup and Tumblr started, they started to give New Yorkers, like for instance, like me, like, oh, I didn't realize this, but you can start a tech company. There are people in New York who've done it. I took them as sort of examples of people who had done it. So all of a sudden I said, well, maybe I don't have to do finance. Maybe I could do tech. And then when New York Magazine puts a bunch of startups on the cover, all of a sudden your friends are like, oh, tech is a real thing. You can do your own startup, et cetera. And we've got companies like Tumblr and companies like Foursquare that have gotten big enough. And whether or not they have huge financial success or moderate financial success, they've basically set the path for everyone else. They've basically said, it's possible, you can do it. Google has opened up an office in New York. There's tons of engineers here. Facebook has opened up an office. Twitter has opened up an office. It's a foregone conclusion in my mind. Now, will it be bumpy? Of course it'll be bumpy. It's always bumpy. There will be a bunch of startups that fail, some startups that succeed. But I think at this point, it's like a foregone conclusion that New York tech is here to stay. The examples have been set. The engineers have come. And I think it's going to be, it's going to be here to stay.
And who's great to hire? I mean, if I see a resume from someone who's been in a startup, even if that startup has failed, I'm almost more excited by that resume because they've been in the trenches. They've seen, presumably some things that have worked and some things that haven't. And so I feel like, as sad as it is when a company doesn't work out, those people often either recycle and they start another company, they go work and make existing companies stronger. And to your point about revenue, when we were fundraising in Silicon Valley, about half the VCs that I spoke to told me, go back to your clients and stop charging them. I just want you to focus on growth. I was like, I'm getting like $10,000, $20,000 deals for an enterprise product that's solving a very clear pain point. Why on earth would I turn that money away? But there's very much, my investors in New York are like, how much is your revenue this much? How much is your revenue? How much is it growing? And not all, but a lot of people we spoke to on the West Coast were like, don't worry about that. Don't price because you don't know what you should price it at. So don't price it at anything. Give it away for free, and we'll worry about that later. And I disagree with that, but that's why I'm here.
Community is something that's, I've mentioned a couple times, but going back to what Vin said about actually seeing that it's possible is huge. And, you're asking, is that community at stake? Is it going to go away? And I think, it is the duty of the entrepreneurs in New York and people at startups to kind of reach out and inspire other people to start companies. And I'm not saying I have very limited time and very limited bandwidth, but when people do email me and ask me for advice or ask if I can do a phone call, I mean, my head spins with emails, but I always try and find the time, whether it's one day out of the month on a Sunday where I dedicate to like getting back to people and helping. And it's part of that community of, if you can see, specifically with female entrepreneurs who I, personally, spend a lot of time with, if they can see someone who had the courage to jump and start a company, and they can see what that looks like, a year out, a year and a half out, even 3 months out, now they know that there is a path to go down. And so I think it is, there is a little bit of responsibility as someone who's doing it to always kind of look back to the people that are maybe 6 months, 9 months, a year and a half behind you and kind of drop the little breadcrumbs and say, come on, you can do it. And that is something I think that's really special about the New York community, but also I think that it's important that whether it is, you write a blog or you respond back via email or speak on panels like this, I think it's really important to kind of let people see that it's possible and also be very honest and transparent about what it really is, because it sucks sometimes. And I think that it's really important.
This is going to be the next Silicon Valley. Should it be? I'd be very curious to hear what you all think.
From a hiring perspective, it is getting easier, especially engineers, as the tech community is growing.
How do you interpret the current state of tech in New York? How has it changed, and where do you think it's going? Because I know there are a lot of kind of grand not promises, but grand projections of.
Been really good for hiring.
I think one of the things that entrepreneurs do extremely well is they go against where everyone else is going. And so one of the things that
you're getting these sort of hubs of really good engineers here, like consulting agencies and other companies, bigger companies like Foursquare and Tumblr are here. And so that's bringing a lot of engineering power. And so that's, I think,
from the entrepreneur side rather than from the media side that I come from, what